I had the whole day off, and honestly, I was looking forward to doing absolutely nothing. The weather outside made it even easier to stay indoors. It had been raining on and off since the morning, and the sky stayed dark and gray the entire day. Cold wind rattled the trees outside my house while rain tapped steadily against the windows. It was the perfect excuse to stay inside, so that's exactly what I did. I spent most of the day playing video games, occasionally getting up to grab snacks or coffee. The hours passed quietly, just the way I liked it. Around 5 in the evening, the rain suddenly became heavier. I could hear thunder rumbling far away, and every few minutes lightning flashed across the sky. The storm was getting serious. I decided to cook dinner while watching the rain through the kitchen window. By the time I finished eating, the storm had become intense. Rain was pouring down so hard that the street outside looked like it was flooding. It felt like the perfect atmosphere for a horror movie. So I turned off the lights, grabbed a blanket, and sat down on the couch. The only light in the room came from the TV screen and the occasional lightning flash outside the windows. For the next 2 hours, I watched the movie while the storm raged outside. Thunder shook the house and lightning lit up the living room in brief flashes. Despite the noise, the power stayed on. Around 10 p.m. the movie ended. I wasn't tired yet, but my legs felt stiff from sitting so long. I stood up to stretch and decided to refill my water bottle in the kitchen. As I turned toward the hallway, something caught my eye. For just a split second, I saw a shadow move across the wall. It was quick, so quick that I couldn't even tell what I had seen. It looked like someone briefly peeking around the corner and then disappearing. I froze. My eyes stayed locked on the hallway wall. After a few seconds, I slowly walked over and looked around the corner. The hallway was completely empty. No movement, no sound, nothing. I stood there for a moment trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was just lightning reflecting through the window, or maybe my mind was still on edge from the horror movie I had just watched. Eventually, I shrugged it off and went back to refill my water. Outside, the storm was getting even worse. The trees were bending in the wind, and rainwater was rushing down the street like a small river. Our town didn't get storms like this very often, so it was always strange when they happened. I went back to the couch and turned on YouTube, hoping to relax a bit before bed, but I wasn't really paying attention to the video. My mind kept drifting back to that shadow. After a few minutes, I leaned back on the couch and stared at the TV. Then I saw it again. Another shadow moved across the wall behind the television. This time it looked even clearer, like someone quickly leaning around the corner to look into the living room before pulling back out of sight. I instantly turned my head toward the hallway. Nothing. My heart started beating faster. I stood up and walked over to check again. I looked around the hallway, checked the corners, and even glanced into the kitchen. There was nobody there. Now I was starting to feel uneasy. Seeing something once could be explained away. Maybe it was lightning or my imagination, but twice that felt different. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but there was a small voice in the back of my mind telling me something wasn't right. I sat back on the couch for another 15 minutes, but I couldn't relax anymore. Eventually, I turned off the TV and decided to go upstairs to bed. Even though I wasn't tired, I figured a hot shower might help calm my nerves. I went into the bathroom, turned on the water, and stepped into the shower. The warm water felt good, and I tried to push the strange thoughts out of my mind. I had been in there for about 5 minutes when suddenly, bang, a violent, deafening crash echoed through the entire house. The sound was so loud it vibrated through the floor. I immediately shut off the water. The house became completely silent. No rain, no thunder, just a disturbing silence that made my ears ring. My heart was pounding as I quickly dried off and got dressed. Something had clearly happened downstairs. Slowly, I stepped into the hallway and began walking down the stairs. Every creak of the floorboards made my stomach twist. When I reached the living room, everything looked normal. But as I stepped into the kitchen, I saw it, the back door. It was barely hanging from the top hinge. The rest of the hinges had been ripped out of the doorframe, and splinters of wood were scattered across the floor. The door hung open, swaying slightly in the wind. My heart nearly stopped. Someone had broken in. I immediately ran back upstairs, locked myself in the bathroom, and called 911. For the next several minutes, I sat there in complete silence, convinced that someone was still inside the house. When the police finally arrived and searched the place, they found something terrifying. The door hadn't been forced open from the outside. It had been ripped off the hinges from the inside. Whoever had been in my house didn't break in. They were already inside. At some point, they must have stormed out, slamming the door so violently that it tore the hinges right out of the frame, which meant something even more disturbing. The shadows I saw earlier, they were probably real. Someone had been inside my house the entire night, quietly moving around and hiding whenever I looked. To this day, I still have no idea who it was, how long they had been there, or what they were doing inside my home. But one thing is certain, I have never slept peacefully in that house again. This happened last winter. I don't remember the exact date, but I remember the weather clearly because it snowed almost non-stop for an entire week. The roads were covered, the wind was brutal, and most people stayed inside unless they absolutely had to go somewhere. I work a hybrid job, which means sometimes I work in the office and sometimes from home. Because of the heavy snowstorm that week, my boss told me to just stay home and work remotely. My house is pretty small. It's a single-story place with just 2 bedrooms. One of the bedrooms doubles as my workspace where I keep a small desk near the window. That morning I woke up early, made a cup of coffee, and sat down at my desk to start working. The snow outside was falling steadily all day. The wind occasionally rattled the windows and the sky stayed gray and heavy. I barely moved from my desk except to grab snacks or refill my coffee. Before I knew it, the entire day had passed. Around 8 p.m. I finally shut my laptop and leaned back in my chair. My eyes were tired from staring at the screen all day. I got up, stretched, and went into the kitchen to make dinner. After eating, I spent some time cleaning up around the house. The snow outside was still falling heavily, and the wind made the night feel even colder. Eventually, I remembered that I needed to bring my trash bins down to the curb for pickup the next morning. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside. The cold air hit me instantly. Snow covered everything: the yard, the sidewalk, the street. The entire neighborhood looked like it had been buried under a thick white blanket. I dragged the trash bins down to the curb and started walking back toward the front door. That's when something caught my eye. On the left side of my house, the snow looked disturbed. Everywhere else the snow was smooth and untouched, but over there it looked like someone had walked through it. Curious, I walked over to take a closer look. As soon as I got closer, my stomach tightened. They were footprints. A line of shoe prints went straight through the snow along the side of my house. That was strange enough on its own, but what really bothered me was how close they were to the wall. Someone had been walking right beside my house. I followed the prints slowly, my eyes tracing each step through the snow. The footprints continued along the side of the house until they suddenly stopped, right outside my bedroom window. The snow around that spot was completely disturbed, like someone had been standing there for a while. My heart started beating faster. That window was where my desk sat. If someone stood there long enough, they could easily look through the small gaps in the blinds and watch me working. And I had been sitting there all day. The thought sent a chill through my entire body. Why would someone be standing outside my window in the freezing cold, and why were they watching my house? I tried to convince myself I was overthinking it. Maybe someone was just walking through the neighborhood and stopped for a moment, but something about it didn't feel right. Still, whoever had been there was long gone now. So there wasn't really anything I could do. I went back inside and locked the door. Eventually I tried to forget about it and continued with my evening. Around 11 p.m. I decided it was time for bed. Before turning off the lights, I walked over to the window and checked outside one more time. The snow had already started covering the footprints again. The wind had blown fresh snow across them, smoothing everything out. There were no new footprints. That made me feel a little better. I triple-checked that the window was locked, then got into bed and fell asleep. The next morning, the first thing I did after waking up was walk over to that same window. I pulled the blinds aside and looked outside. The moment I saw the ground, my heart nearly stopped. There were fresh footprints again, right under the window. They were almost identical to the ones from the night before, leading along the side of the house and stopping directly beneath my bedroom window. Someone had come back, and they had been there during the night. I quickly threw on my jacket and boots and ran outside. The snow was deep, but the footprints were clear. They led to the exact same spot as before. I looked around the yard and across the street. There was nothing, no other footprints anywhere, just those same prints leading to my window. The feeling of being watched returned instantly. I went back inside and called the non-emergency police number. I knew they probably wouldn't be able to do much, but I wanted the situation documented just in case something happened. After that, I had to start work again. Throughout the day, I kept glancing at the window. Slowly, the falling snow began covering the footprints again. By the time evening arrived, the ground looked smooth and untouched. When I finally finished work at 8 p.m., it was already dark outside. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the window once again. I pushed the blinds aside and looked out. The snow looked perfect, flat, clean, untouched. I let out a huge breath of relief. But as I was lowering the blinds again, my eyes drifted down toward the window latch. My stomach dropped. The latch was unlocked. I froze. I clearly remembered locking it the night before, and I hadn't touched it since. Slowly, with shaking hands, I grabbed the window handle. The window slid open easily. My heart started racing. Someone must have unlocked it the night before while they were standing outside. But that meant something even worse. Had they come inside? I backed away slowly from the window. My eyes scanned every corner of the hallway as I quietly moved toward the front door. I grabbed my keys, put on my boots, and ran outside to my car. I called the police while sitting in the driveway. 10 long minutes passed before a patrol car finally arrived. The officer went inside to check the house. I waited in the car, my heart pounding. 5 minutes passed, then another minute. Something felt wrong. Finally, the officer came back out, but he wasn't alone. He had a man in handcuffs. Both of them had blood on their clothes. The officer explained what had happened. The man had been hiding inside a hallway closet. When the officer opened the closet door, the man attacked him. They struggled before the officer managed to subdue him. The man looked to be around 45 years old. His face had a cold, unsettling expression that I'll never forget. No one knows exactly what he planned to do, but the officer told me something that still gives me chills. If I hadn't called the police when I did, that man would have still been inside my house, waiting. A couple of years ago during spring break, I decided to visit my parents who lived in another state. It was a long trip, nearly a 2-day drive, so instead of staying in a hotel, I decided to try something different and booked an Airbnb in a small town not far from where my parents lived. The prices were cheap and the place looked decent in the pictures. After driving for hours and hours, I finally arrived just after the sun had set. As I pulled into the driveway, I immediately noticed how quiet the neighborhood felt. Not normal quiet, unnaturally quiet. There were no streetlights on the road, which made the entire street look dark and empty. Most of the houses around me had their lights turned off. A few had maybe one dim light glowing through a window, but that was it. The Airbnb house I rented was actually the only house on the street with multiple lights on. I stood outside my car for a moment looking around. No people walking, no cars driving by, nothing, just silence. I tried to brush off the uneasy feeling. Maybe the people here just went to bed early. It was a small town after all. I grabbed my bags and went inside. The house itself looked exactly like the photos online. It was small but comfortable. I unpacked a few things, grabbed some snacks, and turned on the TV in the bedroom. After 2 long days of driving, I didn't have the energy to do anything else. I just wanted to relax. A couple of hours passed while I watched a movie. It was probably around 9 or 10 at night when I heard a sound coming from somewhere in the house. At first I thought I imagined it, so I paused the TV and listened carefully. A few seconds later I heard it again, knocking. Someone was knocking on the front door. I grabbed my phone and checked to see if maybe the Airbnb host had tried to call or text me about something. Nothing. The knocking continued. It wasn't aggressive, but it was constant. Whoever it was seemed determined to get my attention. Confused, I walked down the hallway to the front door and opened it. A man stood there. He looked to be in his early 40s. He was wearing a black winter hat and a worn red flannel jacket. For a moment he just stared at me. I said hello. He awkwardly smiled for a second, then his expression went blank again. He mumbled something quietly under his breath that I couldn't understand. Then he simply turned around and walked away toward the road. I stood there watching him disappear into the darkness. I had absolutely no idea what that was about. He knocked repeatedly on my door, but didn't say a single word when I answered. Eventually I closed and locked the door. Maybe he had the wrong house. That was the only explanation that made sense. The rest of the night passed without anything unusual happening, and the next morning I left early to spend the day visiting my parents. I didn't return to the Airbnb until around 6 p.m. After a long day of talking and catching up with family, I was pretty tired again. I went straight to the bedroom and started watching TV. Everything felt normal until around 9 p.m. That's when I heard the knocking again. My entire body stiffened. It was the same sound, someone knocking on the front door. I checked my phone again just in case. Still nothing. This time I walked more cautiously toward the door. Before opening it, I leaned forward and looked through the peephole. My stomach dropped. It was the same man, same black hat, same red flannel. I slowly opened the door just a few inches. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Were you looking for someone?" The man stared at me with an empty expression. "No," he said in a flat, monotone voice. Then he turned around and walked away again, just like the night before. Now it felt truly unsettling. Why come back again just to knock and leave? I closed and locked the door and went back to the bedroom, but this time I left the bedroom door open so I could hear anything happening in the house. Something about the situation felt wrong. A few hours passed. Eventually I turned off the lights and went to bed. Sometime later I woke up suddenly. The room was completely dark. For a moment I didn't even know what had woken me up. Then I heard something outside. It sounded like whispering. Before I could fully process it, bang. A loud knock hit the front door, then another and another. These knocks were different. They were loud, aggressive, and violent. The door shook with each hit. I got out of bed and quietly stepped into the hallway. As I slowly moved forward, I saw something move past one of the windows at the front of the house. A shadow. When I reached the end of the hallway, I carefully looked through the window near the door. The same man was standing there, but this time he wasn't alone. Behind him, farther back in the darkness, I could see another person. Someone was hiding in the shadows. My entire body went numb. I immediately turned around to run back toward the bedroom and grab my phone, but as I turned, I froze. A man was standing outside the back window, staring directly at me. Panic exploded inside my chest. I sprinted back into the bedroom and locked the door. As I dialed the police, I heard footsteps running around the house. Not just one or two people. It sounded like many, maybe 10. Maybe more. They began pulling on door handles and trying to force open windows. Some of them were whispering to each other outside. Others were banging on different parts of the house. It felt like the entire place was surrounded. The minutes waiting for the police felt endless. Then finally, sirens. In an instant, everything went silent. The footsteps disappeared. Whoever they were, they ran. Within seconds, the house was completely quiet again. When the police arrived, they searched the entire property but couldn't find anyone. Later, they contacted the Airbnb host. Oddly enough, he seemed more annoyed than concerned about what happened, which only made the situation feel even stranger. To this day, no one knows why those men were there. My best guess is that someone else had stayed at the Airbnb before me, someone those men were looking for. Maybe they thought that person still lived there, or maybe they believed I was hiding him inside. Whatever their intentions were, I'm just glad the police arrived when they did, because that night, it felt like I was seconds away from something truly terrible happening.